So my friend brought his Switch 2 when he came over last weekend, and I got to play Mario Kart World for about 2 hours. This video is my assessment of the game after having experienced that, along with watching various YouTubers play the game both casually and competitively. So no, I didn't buy this game, I haven't bought a Switch 2, and I probably never will because Nintendo has demonstrated a pattern of souring games with updates after they've released. But despite my being openly critical of the Switch 2, my friend and I are still able to get along just fine, so I expect a similar level of decorum in the comments of this video. Also, before we get started, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'm aiming for 5K by the end of the month. With that all being said, and without further ado, my friend's player 1 and I'm player 2. Mario Kart World is no masterpiece. It's not great, and it's debatably not even good. My expectations have been pretty low ever since the Switch 2 was revealed, and having since played the game, it really feels like it's doing the bare minimum. Going in, I wasn't expecting the game to exceed what Mario Kart 8 Deluxe accomplished in terms of content, but I at least wanted to see how it stacked up against base Mario Kart 8 for the Wii U before it received DLC. I also want to make it clear that I didn't just want to complain about this game, but the omissions and removals that this game has already dragged the game down, and when compounded with the game's price point, I found that there's no other way to talk about this game in good faith. And to those of you who want to defend this game by saying you can just get the bundle, not only is that bundle only available for a limited time, but I prefer to buy my games physical, which isn't an unreasonable request no matter how hard the default profile pictures cry about it. If I were to sum up this game in as few words as possible, I'd say ROM hack. Because this doesn't feel so much like a new game as it does a heavily modified version of Mario Kart 8. The presentation first and foremost is hardly an upgrade when compared to a game released in 2014, and even then, the art style has only been incrementally changed from 8 Deluxe. A significant change in art direction isn't a tall ask either, as Mario Kart Arcade GP DX looks extremely different from 8, in fact it actually predates 8 by almost a year, releasing in 2013, and all things considered it's aged fairly well. So right off the bat, the lack of ambition here doesn't scream next gen or even new entry. The new character models are about what I expected. Donkey Kong's stunt double finally got the role, and despite some random enemy from Mario Galaxy 2 having one, Furukawa's Nintendo still hasn't figured out fur shaders yet, and all those Wonder Flowers have really been taking their toll on Bowser. He looks like the cursed Mario Kart 64 figure they used in Robot Chicken. You know the one. I'd say that all the characters are animated pretty well if they were all animated, but they're not all animated for some reason. Why aren't the Sidestepper and Snowman animated? Those big meaty claws never get anywhere close to the steering wheel, and even if you want to maintain the character silhouette while driving, why don't they at least lean into the turn? And I'm not even gonna ask why the Snowman doesn't have arms, because for the sake of consistency, despite some snowmen having at least one arm in the Mario series, those are actually known as Mr. Blizzard, and these are actually two separate characters. But that begs the question, why didn't you just add the Snowman with an arm? Alright, let's move the goalpost even further and say that they wanted to use the Mario Kart Snowman specifically. Okay. Why isn't his face animated? But while some characters are animated as little as possible, some animation quirks that I'm not a huge fan of are the drift, which is way over animated and I'll get into later, but also the golden mushroom animation. Why does this look like the Octarian damage animation from Splatoon? I know it's a me thing, but that's all I can think of when I see this. I don't have much to say about performance because I'm unable to tell the difference between 60 and 120 FPS, and honestly, I don't really care. As long as the game's rocking a stable 60 FPS, or at least feels like 60, then you won't be hearing any complaints from me, and overall my experience was pretty smooth. I know that people are accusing Nintendo of falsely advertising 120 FPS, but if you go into 4-player split screen, you'll actually get to see 120 FPS in action. See? 30, 60, 90, 120. 30 frames per player. Double Dash's 4-player split screen maintained 60 FPS in 2003, by the way. One detail that I'm mixed on is how debris builds up on the bottom of your vehicle depending on the terrain, which is objectively more realistic, but the neat freak in me absolutely despises this. I didn't like it in Odyssey, and I don't like it here. But one objective improvement that I appreciate is that fabrics like Luigi's cap actually absorb moisture instead of repelling it like plastic, and it only took them 12 years. The UI is a little on the ugly side, but that's up to individual taste. But what's not up to individual taste is this character select screen. You knew this was coming. What is this character select screen? I could complain about the full body portraits taking up too much space and costumes not being consolidated into single character slots, but the real sin here is that every player gets their own scrolling menu instead of it being shared between all players. Why? Why did you do this? It's so obnoxious. Don't do this again. Before we get to actual gameplay, I want to touch on the soundtrack. I wouldn't consider myself a professional musician, but I'll try to articulate what I'm trying to say as best I can using what terminology I do know. Regarding the remixes, the compositions are great and the instrumentation is good for the most part, but given that I recognize every single track that plays, I constantly found myself asking questions like, why is Battle Rock Galaxy playing in the desert? Why is Vanilla Lake playing on the beach? Why is Gusty Garden Galaxy playing in Bowser's Castle? It makes the game feel less like a full game, but rather a separate mode that's part of a bigger game. And getting into the new songs, hot take, this might be one of the least hummable soundtracks in the series, which I know is a weird complaint, but it's a problem that this game has that no other game in the series has except for the new tracks added in the Booster Course Pass, unless your name is Berlin Byways. And I deliberately use the term hummable rather than catchy because the music is catchy, but it's hard to hum or whistle. The greatest offenders in this department are Crown City and Rainbow Road. I always knew that Mario's soundtrack always took inspiration from T-Square, with Mario Kart 8 sounding the most similar, but Mario Kart World straight up is T-Square. Give Little League Star a listen and it sounds like an unused title theme or something. Not playing it here because of copyright, but even T-Square has that hummable quality to it, and I know I'm torturing any musicians watching right now because the term I'm referring to is called a leitmotif, and the difficulty with humming Mario Kart World's music comes down to its often complex melodic contour. Though if someone knows of a more concise term to denote a hummable song versus one that isn't easy to hum, feel free to comment that down below. Whoever's playing the synth in Mario Kart World is going completely off the rails. You can hear the passion going into their performance, but friend, time and place. This is a casual kart racer, not 1999. I'm not saying the music is bad because it's not. I'm also not implying that it's worse because it's different. I mean, as a saxophone player, Crown City looks like a great time. But catchy and easily hummable music has been a staple of the franchise, and its absence here will hurt the game's memorability in the long run. I had nowhere else to put this but the harmonica on Peach Stadium. The harmonica on Peach Stadium. Why the harmonica on Peach Stadium? The grandiose introduction, which perfectly encapsulates the mood of regality mixed with a professional sports broadcast, peters out into this pathetic little harmonica with a bass line that sounds 10 decibels too low. This song was practically begging for an overdrive to take over the main melody. What happened here? And Rainbow Road? Oh boy. I know I'm gonna get destroyed for this one, but Rainbow Road sounds like DS Rainbow Road if it were finished by AI. Not that it was, but I can hear the melody trying so hard not to step on DS's toes. But with that being said, the song is so unwilling to commit to its not DS melody that it doesn't commit to a rule of 3 or really any rule that I can think of, unlike every other Rainbow Road in the series. And because I know this video is gonna get disliked into oblivion, I might as well go ahead and draw the comparison between World's Rainbow Road and a song from Sonic Forces. Not to say that Sonic Forces has a better soundtrack, even though the game has more highlights than people give it credit for, but it's one of the first examples that comes to mind when I think of another song that does this. Anyway, some sections of World's Rainbow Road reminds me of Arsenal Pyramid from Sonic Forces, and how the bridge of that song gets lost midway through and kind of meanders for a bit, but thankfully has the climax to swoop in and salvage the piece. Mario Kart World's Rainbow Road has no such luxury. The composition for this song sounds more like it was made with lyrics in mind than a video game soundtrack. It plays the intro melody once, does a single repeat, and then just goes completely off the rails as the choir and strings try to fool you into a false sense of enchantment while you drive past the static, low-poly clouds. Another point about this version of Rainbow Road is that it tries way harder to constantly one-up itself than committing to being a difficult racetrack. Everyone's first impression of this track was generally positive, but that in and of itself is a problem. You're not supposed to like Rainbow Road, and I'm not just being an elitist here, it's supposed to be that track where you pick it and everyone goes, "Oh, I hate Rainbow Road," but internally everyone's totally up for the challenge. Mario Kart World's Rainbow Road is all style and no substance. I mean, it looks pretty, but there's no sharp bank turns, no wavy roads, no precarious sections where you feel like you could fall off at any time, and strangely enough there's no rails to ride on. This version is an amusement park ride for sure, but it's no roller coaster. Getting into the controls, Mario Kart World has a different approach than what we've become accustomed to since I want to say the DS, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but this is the slowest game in the series by far if we're not counting Tour. I don't expect each game to constantly ramp up the speed with each entry, but the problem is that Mario Kart World feels slow. For one thing, the controls are a lot heavier than previous entries. It's actually somewhat reminiscent of the rear-wheel driving that you had in Double Dash, which allowed you to slip and slide around the tracks in a way that was wholly unique to that game. But after giving Mario Kart World an honest try and even accepting the quirks, the conclusion I've come to is that the controls can work, but because of the game they've been put into, they're awful. And it's a shame because kart racers are by far my favorite game genre, and one of the most appealing factors for me is adjusting to how vastly different they control from one another, memorizing the tracks, and using the game's mechanics to get into a satisfying yet exhilarating flow state. I've played every Mario Kart game in this series, including the arcade games, in their original cabinets. I've played every Sonic and Crash Racing game, Diddy Kong Racing, and their portable counterparts, Power Drift, Daytona USA, Jack X, Mega Man Battle and Chase, F-Zero GX, Stunt Race FX, Bomberman Fantasy Race, Pac-Man World Rally, Kirby Air Ride, Lego Racers, Mickey Speedway USA, Little Big Planet Karting, My Sims Racing, both versions, Toy Story Racer, Garfield Kart, all of them, Smurfs Racing, Smurf Kart, Action Girls Racing, Chocobo GP, and a handful of Nickelodeon kart racers, and probably dozens more if you count racing minigames like the ones in Super Monkey Ball or Tai 2, and don't even get me started on mobile and flash games. And those are just the ones I liked. I have no standards. I could go on and on and on and on. But I want to make it clear that I'm more than willing to give a game's controls a fair shot, even if they're unwieldy or unconventional, and Mario Kart World missed the mark in ways that it really shouldn't. I'm not a fan of how turning feels like you're merely suggesting the direction the vehicle will go rather than properly steering it, and switching to stick controls didn't really fix this because now it feels like I'm controlling an RC car that's low on batteries. In fact, it felt like I was sending stick inputs to a motion control device that would then steer my vehicle a quarter of a second later. It was rough. The most notable difference, however, is the exaggerated drifting animation, which hurts the game feel. I don't know who on the design team decided that every time you try to drift you have to do such a slow and splatty drift animation, and the brakes are virtually non-functional. I don't know what happened here. I feel like I'm constantly driving too slow, with the speed boost from mushrooms and dash panels offering what little sense of exhilaration can be found in the game. The water controls are absurdly stiff, giving Diddy a run for his money, and you have about as much influence over the new glider as you do an actual kite. We also need to collectively apologize to Sega for criticizing Sonic Adventure's physics, because 27 years later, wall riding is hardly more intuitive than what was featured on the Dreamcast in 1998, still feeling rather clunky and inconsistent. But if you want to tell me to get good at Mario Kart World's wall riding physics, then you legally forfeit your right to complain about Sonic Adventure's physics. But controls aren't the only thing that make up a Mario Kart game, and while I'm sure these controls could work in some settings, the rest of this game's design choices are at constant odds with the control changes. And one massive change in this game is the Hitstun. Hitstun in this game is weird, man. Mario Kart has had a handful of damage animations triggered by various obstacles and items. The basic animations are spinning out, which was established back in Super Mario Kart, but ever since Double Dash they consistently included flipping forward, tumbling over, or blowing up, depending on the type of obstacle. I could get into the specifics of how damage changed throughout the series, but generally speaking, that's how it worked, and each of the dedicated animations were done well and conveyed a sense of impact. In Mario Kart World, this looks amateur, with characters simply bumping into the air, tumbling sideways for a few seconds, then the vehicle unnaturally tweens to face the right way. Despite the animation being heavily scripted in previous entries, they ensure that the animation begins and ends with the vehicle having the same orientation. Even if the vehicle appears to overshoot, that's actually a part of the animation in order to avoid that unnatural tweening. It appears that in Mario Kart World, upon taking damage, your vehicle essentially becomes a physics object for a few seconds. The amount of rotations isn't accounted for, so the game unnaturally corrects your character's orientation. This is absolutely a small detail, but like I said, it just seems amateur compared to the snappy and deliberate animations seen in games prior. And the reason why this sticks out to me so much is because this is the band-aid solution I've used for my own project, mainly because I'm more focused on having a functional animation than a polished one. With enough time though, they could have added a kip-up animation where the character springs back upright to prevent how awkward this looks. Though I like how they finally made explosions actually blow up characters again. I know people preferred the reduced hit stun that started in 7 and continued into 8, but from a satisfaction standpoint, I like watching my target careen into the air from an explosion. Not only that, but it also carries their momentum akin to getting hit with the shell in Mario Kart 64. Love this change. It honestly makes up for the awkward tumbling thing from before, because if I had to choose between 8 or World, I actually prefer this. But even with changes I like, there's always a catch. For some reason, items in this game like to mess with your controls more than they used to. I think it has something to do with the little stars that appear after you've taken a hit and your tires go all wobbly for a few seconds, which I had originally assumed was an indication that you had invincibility frames, but also your steering is affected. I promise I've never lost control of my vehicle in a Mario Kart game as much as I have in this one, because I'll spin out, but while I'm trying to reorient myself, I'll start veering into an unintended direction. Then sometimes I'll get bumped, but even after the initial impact, my kart feels like it's gained a mind of its own. Driving in an off-road makes your tires expand. I'm not sure what that's about because you still drive slower anyway, but the over-exaggerated animation makes it more difficult to tell which direction you're actually driving, which makes controlling yourself just that bit more unpredictable. But the changes to the controls wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the player count. Yeah, no, this is just too many karts to have on the track at all times. I thought people were just whining about how often you get Mario Karted. No, it really is that bad, and it's not just often, it's constant. With 23 other players spamming items across the track, the incessant barrage of shells, fireballs, hammers, and boomerangs, the boomerangs will go from funny to downright irritating in a matter of minutes because of the aforementioned ways they interfere with your controls after you've recovered. And speaking of the items, the new ones aren't all that good. We've thankfully seen the return of the Mega Mushroom, which is cool, but the newcomers to the roster leave a lot to be desired. The coin block is an absolute mess of an item in more ways than you'd think. How it works is that it gives you coins while offering a slight speed boost. First of all, they added yet another coin item to the lineup, and as if that wasn't bad enough, for some reason these coins are also dumped onto the track, which does nothing but help your rivals. But even conceptually, I have a bone to pick with this item. Does anyone else find it weird that you get a question mark block from an item box? I always thought that item boxes were just a variation of question mark blocks specifically made for instances where the properties of a question mark block would be incompatible with the current activity. Question mark blocks are barriers by nature, so item boxes were used to distribute items without the caveat of placing a barrier on the road or field. It also helps to convey gameplay consistency because question mark blocks need to be struck while item boxes just need to be touched to receive the item from them. Think the Mario Tennis series or various Olympic games which opt to distribute items via this method as opposed to regular question mark blocks. You can call this a nitpick all you want, but that was quite literally proven to be the case in Toad's Factory, a track which reappears in this game where you can clearly see brick blocks getting turned into item boxes, with said items being visible in the Crusher Piston. So it makes no sense for you to get a coin block or really any variation of a question mark block from an item box, because that'd be like getting a question mark block from a brick block or even a question mark block from a question mark block. Aside from rare instances in Mario Party or something, there's generally an unspoken rule where you don't have this nesting doll of item dispensers, and this decision to go against this otherwise benign detail is symptomatic of Nintendo's overall lack of reverence for Mario's history, despite constantly using him to sell products. And by that, I mean this is the kind of oversight you'd see a bootleg game make, gratuitously using iconography to sell things, but not understanding the rules about the IP you're using. It'd be like if the next Splatoon game casually started using red ink as a standard color, or if Link randomly started talking in the next Zelda game. Another instance like this was Mario Kart Tour's appropriation of Grand Stars. You know this is a nuclear reactor, right? Why is this being used as a ranking system? Just use letter grade. The coin shell is yet another coin item, but done right this time. It essentially acts as a blue shell traveling down the middle of the track, but also trails coins while knocking over other racers in its path, and explodes into a ring of coins at the end. Still a bit too helpful to rivals, but far better execution than the coin block. Kamek transforms players in front of you into PCs, places more hazards on the track, and at one point was the only way to unlock certain characters. Funnily enough, I don't really mind having such a unique unlock system for characters, but apparently this item was an absolute nightmare for many other users. The quote-unquote problem with this item is more so indicative of the game's lack of content than being an objectively bad way to unlock characters. If there were more modes, missions, cart parts, and other unlockables to divert your attention, I doubt people would have made as big of a fuss about this as they did. Also, as over-animated as some elements of this game are, the transforming sequence for your character clips them into this little orb in a single frame and it looks atrocious. Like, why does this look so bad? The Ice Flower is just a reskin of the Fire Flower, and I wouldn't mind its presence here except for the fact that this is the only reskin in the series, and that it's being advertised as a new item. I saved the best item for last, which is the Hammer, and it lets you lob a series of hammers in front of you which linger in the ground for a few seconds like Hammer Bros Skill Shot for Mario Striker's Charge. They even have a hitbox on the ground. Definitely the best executed new item here. I welcome it. Moving on to the tracks, I didn't get to spend too much time exploring them to be fair, but what I got to play was alright. Overall, it just felt like cut content from 8. If they'd lean more into their Mario side by using more iconography like giant mushrooms, swirly mountains, pipes, and the various colored blocks which have become synonymous with Mario's brand, that would really help to differentiate this game from 8's direction, which leans super hard into the grounded look. Again, I point to Arcade DX, which does exactly this. The track which stood out to me the most was DK Spaceport, and visually the track looks like it was taken straight from an arcade GP game. The design of the fireball enemies here were taken from the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series, using the March of the Minis design specifically, and the red girders are unmistakably Donkey Kong iconography. They're small details, but as games get more and more homogeneous due to streamlined development and lighting engines often illuminating games in very similar ways, Mario games need to do more with their environmental design to ensure that they're distinct from other games so they don't run the risk of looking like an asset flip. Besides the tracks, I got my fair share of intermissions, and that 24 player count combined with the wide open roads with no place to take cover is a nightmare, and it's not even in the fun way. The wide roads also contribute to that over-animated drift I was talking about before, where if you drift just a little too early, you better put a ring on that trajectory because you're committed for over a full second, and if you need to reorient yourself, the sluggish steering will ensure that you're breaking your analog stick from the force seemingly required to break out from a slightly mistimed drift. Now, one of the most heavily advertised features of this game is the open world aspect, and there's no beating around the bush here. this was an awful design choice. In my time with the game, I didn't play the free roam at all, not because I couldn't, but because I just didn't want to. After the absolute train wreck of Mario Odyssey, I've had my fair share of aimlessly wandering around boring, empty sandboxes, desperately searching for the reason why my purchase wasn't a complete waste of money, and the general consensus seems to agree with me. That being said, I tried Knockout Tour and it was a lot of fun at first, but after only a handful of rallies, you start driving past the same locations over and over and over again, even on different rallies, so while the cohesion of the world is immersive, that doesn't really matter when I've already gotten tired of seeing the same landmarks half an hour ago. The visual variety of previous games just isn't there, and the simplicity of the roads you drive on just adds to the tedium of it all. The open world doesn't even work on a conceptual level for me, because while I enjoyed being able to see various locations from other tracks in Double Dash, the thought of being able to drive there manually did cross my mind, but I never had a desire to do so. Basically, I understood that the tracks you drive on are the actual points of interest, and everything in between isn't accessible because it's just not as interesting. And despite all the technical advancements since then, Mario Kart World managed to confirm a suspicion I had since 2003. Another reservation I had about an open world Mario Kart game is the amount of grass that the world is covered in, which unlike feet gets slowed down when traversing it. It's the same reason why I don't like Battle Course 1 in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Traveling across all kinds of terrain necessitates an all-terrain vehicle, but if grass doesn't slow you down, then what's stopping you from cutting through off-road? Of course, they could have resolved this issue by making the giant tires actually negate the speed loss while in free roam, but nah. Good old gameplay first Nintendo was too busy making up to 3 variations of food items which are functionally identical reskins of mushrooms. I'm going to repeat that. Gameplay first Nintendo created 60, count 'em, 60 unique food models, all of which function as a reskin of the mushroom for the sole purpose of reskinning your character. Frankly, the Dash food is a microcosm of Mario Kart World's problems, and likely the game's development as a whole. It's overly detailed in the wrong places, too much effort went into things that ultimately don't matter, you have to grind for cosmetics, it's one of the few things to actually unlock in the game, and the costumes clog up the menus. Like, what isn't wrong with this item? Then, on the development side, I could only imagine how poor the management must have been for this project to wind up with all these highly detailed food items for a racing game that lacks basic features which were present in past entries. Think of all the time and money that went into modeling each and every food item that didn't go towards a better free roam experience, more tracks, a story mode, or really any new features. It's true that modeling and programming are 2 different skill sets, but you have to understand that somebody got hired to make these food models instead of hiring a different person to make more tracks or code new modes. While I could go into detail about how Nintendo can fix the game, I'm past the point of making suggestions because a kart racer is a solved genre already. They don't need me to remind them what features a game like this should have. And the audacity for a company of their size to release a game in this state is a clear-cut sign to me that they just don't care anymore. So I'd rather just play a different game by developers who do care, or even just make one myself. I know that I couldn't do better in terms of sheer production value, but I'm confident that I could make a kart racer that I'd rather play. And I hate it because Mario Kart has been a heavy inspiration for my own project, and to see them fumble so hard has been, okay, unsurprising, let's be honest, but still no less disappointing. Do I have a desire to play this game again? Sure. But no more than I'd want to play the arcade titles. And I think that's a good way to put it. It's a game worth playing, but not worth owning. There's a joke for game key cards in there somewhere. Overall, Mario Kart World is half-baked Mario Kart in a quarter-baked open world, and Nintendo can definitely do better. But those are my thoughts on the game so far, and I'd like to hear yours. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to leave a like, comment your thoughts down below, and subscribe to see the next post as soon as it goes live. Alright, take care.